Today's episode is for the practitioners, those humble heroes that come into a podcast wanting to share what they know, but also wanting to grow their brand and their business. And one of the most common questions they have is, how can I tell people about my product without sounding salesy? Now, the influencers, they don't care, right? They're just out there pitching. But for the rest of us, in today's episode, we're going to tackle this head on. I'm going to sit down with Kristen Nolan today. Now, Kristen is a blessing to the team. She's a seasoned podcast strategist and someone I deeply respect when it comes to helping people master this medium of podcast interview marketing. Together, we break down exactly how you can make a meaningful connection with listeners and your ideal clients, how you can share your expertise with confidence and guide the audience to take that next step. And all without ever sounding pushy or promotional. Kristen and I will walk through real world examples. We'll talk about the 5 deadly sins that turn off listeners and piss off hosts, and how to use stories and structure to build trust instead of more skepticism. Now, if you want to grow your brand, if you want to grow your business through podcast interviews and do it with integrity and impact, this conversation is your playbook. So let's dive in. Kristen, I am so excited to talk with you about this. It's a common question we get from people. How do I sell on a podcast without sounding salesy?
Yeah, absolutely. Clients ask me that all the time. How do I talk to people and tell them about my product, but not be so salesy?
Yeah. And it's, sales is a 4-letter word. Well, I guess sale is a 4-letter word, right? And so a lot of people come to this and they're like, they want to get results from the podcast interview, right? This is marketing. If it doesn't make dollars, it doesn't make sense. But in the same way, this is, podcast interviews are not webinars. They're not teleseminars. This is not QVC. So there's a way to do it. And I'm really excited to sort of jump into what we have learned over the last decade. So tell me more about like the mindset you have of, going into the podcast. What's the objective? What's the mindset that you tell clients to go with?
Yeah. So one thing that I really emphasize to them is around connection, right? You want to connect with people. And I think that first and foremost is the most important. And then I also think having a problem that people can relate to with that connection and then a solution, right? I often will advise my clients and use your podcast interviews as an example. We talk about welcome pages, right? And so I will advise my clients sometimes to talk about, welcome pages and try to organically weave in that welcome page, more than once if possible, right? And so sometimes I'll get a little bit of pushback and they'll say, well, that feels really salesy. We have a lot of clients that are authors, right? And so they'll reference their book throughout the podcast. And I'll say, hey, there's nothing wrong with saying, hey, my book XYZ, I'll give you a little more information about that with my welcome page at the end. And kind of weaving that in there more organically so it doesn't come across as salesy.
Yeah. And you hit on a bunch of points there, and all of them are great there. And it's like that idea of, well, why are you there in the first place, right? It's to help people, to make an impact. And one of the people that I read, Rabbi Daniel Lapin, I always refer to him as my rabbi. I'm not Jewish, but everybody should have a rabbi. And I love how he points it out. He said, if you think you can help someone, why wouldn't you give them the next step, right? Wouldn't you be doing them a disharm? At the end of the day, it's their decision. You can put it out there and they can either take it or not. But to after they've listened to you for 30 or 45 minutes, close it up, tell them where that next place is to go. And I think starting with the end in mind, even before you hit record, there's things you can do. Like I always think of going into a podcast. Okay, what do I want the audience to think, right? What do I want them to believe? And what do I want them to do? You should start with the end in mind there, because if you don't have that figured out, it's like, oh, that was just a nice random conversation. I wonder why it didn't hit my goals, right? Well, I don't know. It's just a shot in the dark at that point.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think sometimes, people just go on podcasts and they talk about themselves, right? Like no one goes and listens to a podcast and is like, you know what? I think I would love to listen to someone talk about themselves for 30 minutes in a monologue.
All right. Now you're giving a teaser to something else in the summer series of stop telling your personal story, but we'll get to that later. So, even before the interview, right? You talked about, I mentioned my welcome page, but it sounds salesy. One of the things that I always teach is before we get on an interview, right? Before we even hit record, there's some conversation that goes back and forth. And one of the things is to always ask the other person, what are you hoping to get out of this? Where do you want to go? I always vision it of like dancing, right? Before the music starts, tell me what dance we're doing, because if not, it's going to look or sound really funny. And, often they'll come back to you and say, well, what are you hoping to get out of this? And to even tell them that I've made a welcome page for your audience, right? A special page on my website. It's got A, B, and C. And if it's okay with you, I'd like to mention that at the end, or I'd like to mention that. The thing is that most podcasters will bring it up before you do. So you don't sound salesy. It's just like they brought it up and you just answered the question.
Yeah, absolutely. And even some podcast hosts, they'll sort of have like a pre-screening sort of thing before they'll consider a guest. And some of them will even ask, do you have a free giveaway for our listeners, right? That's a great opportunity to lead into what are your calls to action? What are those things that you're offering to the audience?
So let's talk more about starting with the problem, right? One of my favorite compliments I have ever gotten, it was from a previous company, is from the client that came and said, you guys are just like Preparation H. And I was insulted because my product and service is not like Preparation H. And he's like, no, it's a compliment. You provide fast relief. You came recommended. And I realized that nobody cares about our product or service. They care about their problem. And, the faster we can get to solving that, the more they'll listen. So talk more about like where we focus on the problem.
Yeah. So when I'm strategizing with clients, I think it starts with that first foundational question. And we went into a lot more depth here with, our previous episode with Jeff Barch, but, natural instinct when a host asks you, tell us about yourself, right? We hear people going into, well, I did this in college. I did, you're reciting your resume and you're trying to develop that credibility. But I think what's so critical is that you go in and you talk about, a personal story. You talk about a problem that is relatable to the audience and they can see themselves in that problem. And then you talk about the solution that you can help provide. So that then provides that instant connection. And then you are able to get their attention so that they want to listen to you. They want to continue to find out what you have to offer. And it just continues to build on that throughout the conversation.
Yeah. And you make a great point there that too many people try to use the first half of the interview building credibility as opposed to connection. And I think of it as like, if you go to a physician's office, right? They've got a limited amount of time with you. They don't start off with, this is where I was born. This is where I grew up. This is where I went to training, right? No, if they are in the white coat and they are there, you assume that they've got the credibility. In the same way on a podcast interview, the host has already vetted them. So, that's starting to jump into right the beginning. I believe this is the biggest problem, businesses have. I believe that this is what's not working in the world. Those strong disruptive statements that will catch somebody's attention. Then you can say, well, and I've discovered this because I've been working in the industry for a decade. Oh, okay. But if you start, I've been in the industry a decade. Yeah. You and everyone else.
Yeah. And I think, your experience and your background is then highlighted throughout the conversation, right? The people that have the most impact are not the people that are kind of like, shouting from the rooftops all the things that they've done. They're sort of weaving that into the conversation and showing you their expertise throughout the conversation. So you don't have to start with that. You don't have to lead with that. And so, it's not, it's less bragging and more connection.
Yeah. And it's like, where do you put the spotlight, right? Is the spotlight on me as the guest? And, enough about me. Now, what do you think about me? Right. It's sort of vanity there. So if you just go with ego of talking about yourself, it sounds self-serving, but you talk to people about, tell stories, tell anecdotes, tell your success through your clients, make your clients the hero, because the listeners want to be the hero too.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think, you have to kind of flip the lens, right? Like you're not the star of the show, right? You're just taking an experience and you're kind of like a translator, right? So, it's important for you to share stories that the audience can connect with, and that you're sharing these ideas and connecting with them, but you don't want to also like dominate, right? It should be a conversation. You don't want to be, having these monologues where you're going on and on for 5, 6, 7, 8 minutes. I mean, I see, we do the interview analysis, right? And I'll see that like, I'll have a client that's had, a 7-minute monologue. And I'm like, the host can't even get in a word edgewise. And that's not what people are listening to podcasts for. If they want to, they'll listen to audiobooks.
And I love how Liz Brooks from our team does that. She came from the PR world and she tells stories, but it's interesting because she has signed more NDAs probably in her life than I have. So she can tell stories, but she can't tell names, right? And so, she can tell a story, even, internally in the team, she'll say, I was working with this big Silicon Valley firm, right? I can't mention their name, but you'd recognize it. And then she'll tell the story, and people are like, I wonder which one she's talking about. It's still a meaningful story. It's very specific. It's not just, well, there was this one client I had one time. And so it gets people's attention. It's like, oh, that company, even though she didn't mention the company or the name of the person, sounds like me.
Yeah, it's piquing their curiosity to learn more, right? Like, and so I think the more that you're able to give them information where they can visually see themselves in that picture that you're painting, it allows them to connect with that and go, okay, I am experiencing that problem. I can see myself in that problem, and I can visualize myself in that solution that you're offering. And so it makes them want to learn more. And the other part to that, I think also is likability, right? One of the great things about podcasts, and I tell my clients this all the time, is that, when a client hears you on a podcast and reaches out to you afterwards, they know you a little bit, right? They know the type of person you are. They know your humor because they've listened to you for 30 or however long the podcast is. So they know you on a deeper level than if they just called you up, randomly and had a conversation. So those initial kind of things, initial jitters maybe, gone at that point.
Yeah. And it's, you've got the benefit of knowing who the audience is on a podcast. So you can sort of think about the examples that you're going to use beforehand. So, going back to how to not sound salesy, well, don't go into your normal pitch. Tell a story just for that audience. Matthew Pollard, talks about this, in, The Introvert's Edge, and making it very specific. So if I'm on GMAP, Grow My Accounting Practice, the story that I'm going to tell is about an accountant, right? All right. Make it specific. If I'm on Boss Mom podcast, right? And I give an example, I'm going to say she, right? As opposed to he, right? And it's still on my list of dream podcasts. She's never had a male guest, but maybe Dana will have me as the first male guest there. But just make sure that you contextualize with them, because if not, it just sounds like a boilerplate sales pitch.
Yeah. And I think you hit on a great point with that. It's like, you don't want to have, 10, 12, 15 podcasts that sound exactly the same, right? You should be customizing each podcast interview for that audience, for that podcast. And so how you also make sure that you don't sound salesy is that you show up and you tailor your message to that audience. You're not just, you don't have, a Google Doc open and you're reading verbatim, this elevator speech that you have. You're customizing your content to what makes sense to that audience.
Now, there's 5 deadly sins that I have seen people have on podcast interviews. And before we go in and give you an example of, hey, here's a way to wrap up your podcast and not sound salesy, I want to go in unpack these 5 deadly sins, because each time I hear it on a podcast, I just cringe. And the first one, Kristen, is, for the love of God, please do not mention your price on the podcast, right? Not only does it sound tacky, but it's downright dangerous for you. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's, I feel like you are going to alienate some people, and you're going to, I think it's tacky, right? Like it's like putting your price tag out there. I mean, if you go into a store, they kind of hide the price tags. They want you to see what you're getting and want it. And then you have, the idea that you want it, and then you talk about the price, and then you see what the price is, right? You don't lead with that. No salesperson comes out and is like, hey, I'm not going to tell you anything about my offering, but here's what my price is. People are going to be like, no, that's too much, because you don't know what you're getting.
Yeah. It's like, how much is it? Well, what is it first? Right? They don't know. So it just, you'll attract the wrong people. You'll repel the right people. If you start doing that, it's tacky. It'll sound like a sales pitch, right? Today only just $9.99, right? And the other thing is downright dangerous.
You'd never walk around with your price on your forehead. Like that's what it is. Like going on a podcast is like walking around with your, and sharing your price is like walking around with it on your forehead. You'd never do that.
And this is evergreen content. So if I quote the price in that podcast, that's the price I've got to offer forever, right? So say you're just starting out and you're like, yeah, this, you name it, our course, our coaching, our services start at, $499 a month. That's what they're going to think, right? And the thing is that someone could hear you on that podcast 5 years from now. Your services have changed, your market has changed and stuff like that. Guess what? They're still expecting $499 a month. And so in an evergreen format, you don't put out a price, right? Inflation is an amazing thing, right? What was expensive, few years ago may not be expensive now. So don't be tacky and talk about a price. The other one, the second deadly sin, is not mentioning the name of your book or the name of your company.
Yes. So often I have people that I'm like, or another thing that I would say is like, how do people find you? Right. People won't mention that. And I will listen to podcasts and I'm like, you had a great conversation, but no one knows where to find you. So, you're wondering why you haven't gotten any leads, but like, you're not giving people a way to find you or what you're about.
And I've seen media trained people mess up on this on a podcast because it's different, right? If I'm on television, there's that little ticker underneath me that says Tom Schwab, founder, interview valet. If I'm on radio, they're going to come back every time from commercial break. Hey, welcome back. We're here with Tom Schwab from Interview Valet, right? The morning drive. When you're on a podcast, you don't have any of that. So the host is going to mention your company or your book at the beginning. And then so many times we'll be listening to a podcast and the author's talking about a book. And I'm like, that sounds great. And I have no idea of the author's name other than, the host keeps calling her Kristen. Okay. So her first name's Kristen. But every time She talks about the book. She says, in the book, we talk about exactly how to do this. In the book, we talk about this. And I'm like, what's the name of the book? Right. And my chances of going back to the show notes to find it or reversing and backing up to find it, that's just effort. So mention, in the book, Collaborative Careers, we talk about this, in the book, The Existing Marketing Trap, we talk about this, back at our company at Interview Ballet, we do this. And that's just helpful for people. It's not salesy. It's really just acknowledging the medium.
Absolutely. And I think on the flip side of that, right? So you can, there's two extremes, right? You can not say anything. And then at the end, you can also have people where a host is like, where can I find you? And they rattle off 55 things. And I think so often people forget that one, people are usually listening to podcasts doing something else, right? They're driving, they're working out, they're doing a million other things. And so nobody's sitting down writing 50 different ways to find you. And so that's where, taking it back to the welcome page that we mentioned, right? Something easy to remember and saying, hey, this is where you can find XYZ, giving them a reason to go to that site.
Yeah. It's a different medium there. And you've got to respect the medium. And that's where the third deadly sin that I just do the face plant on every time I hear is when somebody tries to do this timeliness or scarcity. And it usually sounds like, thanks, Kristen. And for the next 5 visitors, for the first 5 visitors back to the page, we've got this, this free offer, use the coupon code, podcast interview. And, for the first 5 visitors, you'll get this 100% free. Well, first of all, it's tacky with the price and the free and everything like that. But it's like you totally forgot the medium here. This is evergreen content.
Yep. And I think like when I see that, it doesn't make me want to sign up because it doesn't like, and then you'll get the email where it's like 2 spots left. And it's like, okay, well, you told me there were 5 spots before. So I know that 3 people have signed up and it's been a couple of weeks. So like, I know that it's not in demand because I can then sort of read between the lines. So the other thing that you're doing, and I think the initial thought with that is that you're sort of creating this like, need to like have people sign up quickly. But what you're doing is you're also giving away sort of information. And if people, are logical, they're going to go, well, there's not very many people signing up for this, and then it sort of can plant seeds of doubt where they're like, I don't need to do this. Nobody else is doing it.
Yeah. And as Bill Troy said, big fish don't swim through funnels and whales don't click, right? So if you're trying to force them into a funnel, your best clients, aren't going to do that, right? Your best clients are going to be the ones that want to work with you, right? As Ari Galper says, we don't want a sales funnel. We want a sales cylinder. Right? Let me have 6 conversations for 5 sales. So the next one, number 4, I can think of my kids have taught me this one. You're not the boss of me, right? Don't tell people what to do, and I hear this at times, at the, any final thoughts? Yes. If you're a 6 or 7 figure entrepreneur, stop what you are doing right now and go sign up for my master class, right? It's like this whole thing of that's heavy pressure sales. And I always think of Bix Bixen, one of our clients, great futurist from Vancouver. He would always invite you, I invite you to think about this. I invite you to look at it a different way. I invite you to consider it, right? And as opposed to him telling someone what to do, because it's like judo, right? If you push somebody, they'll push back. But if you invite them along, right? I invite you to come back to the website and check this out.
Absolutely. And I think, what you kind of mentioned is that like used car salesman approach, right? Nobody wants to feel like they're being sold something. And I'll tell you, my background is in sales. And so, I found that like, people organically wanted to buy from me because I, would offer them something. I was never aggressive or pushy. And I told them like, hey, here is what I'm offering. Whatever that was, it was either a fit for them or it wasn't. And that was fine. If it was a fit, it was an organic sale. If it wasn't a fit, that's fine. But it's all about finding the right people that see your value and can benefit from your product or service. And then it doesn't have to be salesy and aggressive and all of these things. It then becomes organic, and it's a mutually beneficial relationship and a mutually beneficial sale where everybody is happy. We're not going back and forth and being like, well, I thought I was getting this, and it's like this pressure sort of thing, where then, if it's a pressured sale, then people sort of have buyer's remorse after the fact, right?
Yeah. And that's where, the people with the 2 comma club, right? And, we sold all of this, right? 7 figures worth of stuff. But what they don't tell you is that, they spent a third of it on Facebook ads, and another third was on refunds for people that had the buyer's remorse. And I think there's a major difference in sales between selling a low-level product and selling a high-level service, right? Products can be sold, but services are bought, right? So this idea of trying to hard sell, it's going to destroy trust. And that's what you need for the high level. And I hate the term high ticket sales. It's like, no, there's a difference between a low ticket transaction and a relationship sale, right? It just doesn't scale up. It's a different sale.
Absolutely. And I think, a huge part of that comes down to, relationships and connection. And that's really where the emphasis and the focus should be versus that aggressive, sales approach. And I think, if you're focusing on the connection and the relationship building with the audience and things like that, you're going to see better results than if you're doing, those 4 deadly sins that you had mentioned.
And the final deadly sin there is, to me, is trying to get everybody to sign up, right? The people that just want more leads, and they make it so generic that people don't know if they should sign up or not. And at the end of the day, they may get lots of leads, but none of them turn into clients.
Yeah, I think, and I often talk to clients about this, right? Where I tell them, like, you have to identify who are your people. And let's niche down a bit. I know we had a previous client, Craig Cody, and Tom, you often talk about him. Do you want to tell a little bit about his story and kind of how we were able to, identify, his target audience of dentists?
Yeah. And Craig he's got more personality than any accountant you'd ever want to meet, right? He's a retired New York City cop. And he came to us and he said, I want 50 different clients in 50 different states and 50 different industries. He was trying to diversify. And okay, but we got him on a podcast, and, it was a dental podcast, and it worked so well for him, right? The data showed that. We took it back to him, and he's like, oh, I love dentists, right? They're professionals, recession proof, good cash flow. And that way he was able to double down and start going after more dentists. I think for 6 months, all he did was dental podcasts. He had his own dental podcast for a while there. And so he was very specific in there. And even when we were working with him, he was very clear of, these are the types of clients I can bring value to. These are the ones I can't, right? So if he was just saying, I want more leads, well, let's put you on some entrepreneur shows or solopreneur shows, right? And you could do this, and you could do a free assessment and free everything. But you would have been attracting people that you couldn't serve, that you didn't want to serve. You'd be wasting their time and your time.
Absolutely. And so that's why I often will tell my clients, like, it's really important to niche down. Now, we don't want to niche down too far, but we want to be able to have an open mind and go, okay, I can see the value for this group of people, and let's, test that out, right? If your focus and your niche is in service-based companies, okay, let's look at law firm-based podcasts. Let's test a few of those out. Let's see if that is your niche, right? And then that way we're able to really identify who your people are and get you in the rooms with those people.
Yeah. And Eddie Yoon talks about this in his book from Harvard Business Review, Super Consumers. And I think he's really onto something. It's almost like that Pareto principle on steroids. He's like, the people you want to market to are your super consumers, and they'll tell everyone else. They'll put it on social media. They'll be your referral partners, and the other people you don't want to. And so be very clear on that, right? When you say this is who it works well for, right? Podcast interview marketing works for people that have relationship sales, somebody that's at a strong point of view, somebody that's a missionary, right? That really believes in this, right? And then to come around and say that, yeah, it works for nonfiction authors. It works for category designers, professional services. Tell people these are the super consumers. Here's that. Then come and tell people, and it doesn't work for this, right? It doesn't work for fiction authors. It's not, nobody needs to know the author for this. If you've got a local business where people have to drive, it's very inefficient, right? You'll talk to the world and only your neighbors are your customers. So help people to really narrow down on that, because at the end of the day, if you really want this to be about building your brand and building your business, you don't just want random leads. You want clients that are really value what you do.
Absolutely. 100%. And I think those people will come organically if you're building that relationship and connection.
Yeah. So you want to do a little role play on how to wrap up an interview?
Sure.
So here we are. And if, Kristen and I would have talked about before we even hit record of, hey, I built this welcome page, for you. And the offers are there. Heck, I'm going to use a welcome page that I use all the time. As an example, I had an interview with Jamie Masters, years and years ago. Jamie is one of the OGs. She actually is the person that was coached, John Lee Dumas and Pat Flynn on how to start a podcast. So, I have a page for her, so I'll reference that one, but we'll go into this at the end of the interview. When people say, how do people get in touch with you? This is what it sort of sound like.
Yeah. So, you can find me at, interviewvalet.com/EM. And there you'll find an online assessment. You will find a free copy of the book Podcast Guest Profits. And you will also find a link to Tom's schedule, where you can schedule a discovery call if you'd like to learn more.
Perfect. And if you see that, she told them where to go. She told them what they'd find there, right? And it's a small yes, a medium yes, and a heck yes. So if somebody just wants the checklist, it doesn't take them a whole lot of time. If they have a little bit more time or money, right? The book, right? For our clients, it's not so much about selling the book. It's the time for that. And then if they have heard you and you're the answer to prayer, don't slow them down in a funnel. Let them talk to there. And Kristen, one of the things that we've learned from our clients, right, can be very powerful is sort of that emotional close, right? So tell them where to go, tell them what they'll find there, tell them where to go again, right? Just in case they forgot that. And then connect with them, right? And just say something like, if this could help you, I'd love to serve you with this. Or the other one too is, if you know someone that could benefit from this podcast interview, can you share it with them? That is so powerful, right? I jokingly say, right, that old idea of, I don't have a drinking problem, but I know lots of people at the bar that do, right? And so they'll refer it to other people. Or where we really saw this is early on, we were working with that company that was trying to focus on catching parents of their first child before they delivered, right? They had a great product and service, but there's like maybe a 7-month window there between when you know you're pregnant and when you actually deliver. So trying to find those people is really tough. But what they found is those people know other people in that area there. And so when those people would hear this and go, darn, I wish I would have known about this 6 months ago. When they would say, could you tell someone about this? And they're like, oh yeah. Our friends, our neighbors, they're 6 months behind us. let's tell them now.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Sharing is caring.
Sharing is caring. And it's like, the whole thing behind this is not how to sound salesy. Well, don't sell, help people, help them with your knowledge, help them with that next step, help them solve the problem. Because, there's a famous quote. I wish I knew who said it. He said that education without action is entertainment, right? You're not there just to entertain. You're there to educate and to help people. And for that, they've got to take the next step.
I love that. I love that quote.
You mentioned sales. Do you ever remember the Sandler sales method?
I do. I was in a training, and one of the things that the biggest takeaway that I remember, is that, it's like a pendulum, right? And so, in the pendulum, you want to stay just behind the client so that they feel like you are a trusted advisor, but that you are not like smarter than them or know more than them, but you are a trusted advisor.
The other day, I found out who DJ Doug Sandler is related to. So, Doug Sandler is from the Nice Guys on Business podcast. He runs a podcast production agency called Turnkey Production. And somebody told me that his dad is the one that started and taught all of the Sandler sales methods. And I'm thinking, Doug never said that, right? And after I heard it, it's like, oh yeah, that's exactly who Doug is and how he sells the consultative sale, and such a humble guy too. He didn't lead with that. But one of the things that I will always remember from an interview with him, and it's the last phrase I want to leave with this. If you don't want to sound salesy on a podcast, just do what DJ Doug Sandler says. He says, when you're a guest on a podcast, just do a good job. You don't have to promote yourself. If you do a good job, the host will promote you better than you ever could. And so that's a great takeaway there. If you don't want to sound salesy, just do a good job.
Absolutely. I love that advice.
Thanks, Kristen.
Thank you.
What a powerful conversation with Kristen. If you've ever hesitated to share your service or your offering on a podcast because you were afraid it might sound a little bit too salesy, I hope you feel empowered now. Because when you truly have something that you can believe that solves your client's problem, when you're the answer to someone's prayer, I believe it's your duty to give them that next step, to let them decide. We talked about how to weave your story and success through your clients, not just pitching your resume. How to shift from building credibility to building connection. And why having a clear welcome page isn't some sales tactic. It's a service. As Kristen said, it's not about being a pitch machine. It's about being a trusted advisor. So here are your action steps. Before your next interview, ask yourself these 3 questions. What do I want the audience to think? What do I want them to believe? And finally, what do I want them to do? If you found value in this episode, I'd invite you to share it with someone who could benefit from them. Remember, podcast interview marketing is not about hype. That's not what drives results. It's about human connection, service, speaking to your ideal clients, and helping them move from being passive listeners to active visitors to engaged leads. Until next time, stay strong. The world needs to hear you now more than ever.